In the spring of 1955, a man named Don Kirby drove off the lot in Kokomo, Indiana, behind the wheel of a brand new 1955 Chevrolet Bel Air. 265 cubic inch V8, 4 barrels on the carburetor. He paid $2,140 for it, which was about 6 weeks' wages at the Chrysler stamping plant where he worked. He and his wife Carol drove that car for 22 years without replacing the engine. They replaced the points, the plugs, the belts, the water pump twice. They put a new carburetor on it in 1968, and when Don finally sold it in 1977, it had over 280,000 miles on the clock and the engine was still pulling strong. His grandson told me that story in my shop back in 2004. He brought in a 2002 Chevrolet Impala, same brand, same company, with 86,000 miles on it. The engine had thrown a rod. The repair estimate was $4,000. He was 28 years old, still making payments on it. Same company, 47 years apart. One engine that ran 22 years and 280,000 miles. One that couldn't make it to 90,000. That's not an accident, that's a business plan. And I'm going to tell you exactly when it started, who decided it, and what you can do today to make sure they don't collect on you. My name is Earl Kowalski. I spent 44 years working on American motors. From 1972 to 1999, I was on the line at General Motors, Buick City plant, right here in Flint, Michigan. After that, I ran my own shop for 17 years before I retired. I have rebuilt more American V8 engines than I can count. I have watched, from the inside, how Detroit made the decision to stop building cars that last forever and start building cars that fail on a schedule. The man who made that decision had a name: Alfred P. Sloan, president and later chairman of General Motors from 1923 until 1956. He was not an engineer, he was a businessman. And in 1924, he made a decision that changed every car you have ever owned. Before Sloan, General Motors had a problem. The problem was that their cars were too good. A Model T built in 1915 was still running in 1924, still carrying families across the country, still doing the job it was built to do. And every year that a family kept their old car was a year they didn't buy a new one. Henry Ford had built something so reliable that it had almost destroyed its own market. Sloan looked at that problem and he did not solve it by building a better car. He solved it by making last year's car feel embarrassing. He called it the annual model change. Every year, starting in 1924, General Motors would redesign the body of its cars. New chrome, new fins, new colors, new styling, so that whatever you drove last year suddenly looked old. It was not engineering, it was psychology. He was not selling transportation anymore, he was selling status. And the moment you bought into the idea that your car needed to look new, Detroit had you on a lease for life. That was the first layer, the styling layer. But there was a second layer, the one they don't advertise. I learned about the second layer the hard way on the floor of Buick City in the mid-1980s. We were building a 3.8-liter V6, a solid engine, good design, well-balanced. And one day a foreman came down with a spec change from engineering, a tolerance adjustment on the main bearing journal. We were widening the tolerance, meaning we were allowing more play, more looseness, in a critical junction between the crankshaft and the block. I asked the foreman why. He looked at me the way foremen always looked at line workers who asked why. He said it was a production efficiency decision. That wider tolerances were easier to hold consistently at volume. Maybe that was true, but wider tolerances mean more engine wear over time. They mean the oil film between moving parts breaks down faster. They mean a motor that might have gone 400,000 miles on a tight build will start showing wear at 150,000 on a loose one. That is not an accident. That is a calibrated decision about how long an engine should last before the customer starts thinking about a new one. I am not saying everyone in engineering knew what they were doing. Most of them were just doing their jobs, following specs from above. But the specs from above were not random, they were calibrated. I watched it happen again in the 90s with the introduction of non-rebuildable components. In my father's day, He worked the River Rouge plant for Ford in the 50s. Almost everything on an engine was rebuildable. You could take a worn crankshaft, have it ground, put it back in with new bearings, and get another 150,000 miles out of it. You could rebuild a carburetor with a $12 kit. You could regrind a valve seat with a hand tool. By the 1990s, Detroit was engineering out repairability, sealed units, modules, components that were cheaper to replace than to rebuild, cheaper in time, not in money. The labor to disassemble and rebuild was priced out of the market. The replacement part, marked up 300% by the dealer, was presented as the only reasonable option. And behind that was the parts network, the aftermarket, the dealer service department that exists for one purpose: to make sure that fixing your car costs more than it should, so that eventually you start thinking about a new one instead. I had a customer, Walt Ciaraki, a retired mechanic from Western Pennsylvania, who brought in a 1989 Ford F-150 with a 4.9 inline-six, good motor. One of the last truly simple, rebuildable engines Ford built. Had a worn timing chain, some valve guide wear, oil consumption getting noticeable. A dealer told him the engine was done and quoted him $6,000 for a factory replacement. Walt brought it to me. I rebuilt it for $840 in parts and 2 days of labor. A timing chain, timing gears, valve guides reamed and new seals, piston rings, new gaskets throughout. The engine ran for another 160,000 miles. I know because Walt called me when he finally sold the truck. He drove it for 11 more years after that rebuild. That is the money they are trying to keep you from having. Here is the thing about the motors from the 50s and 60s that made Don Kirby's Bel Air go 280,000 miles. The 265 and 327 small block Chevrolet engines were built to clearances that came out of an era when Detroit was still competing to be the best, not competing to be planned. The block walls were thick, the journals were tight, the valve train geometry was simple and robust. The oiling system was pressure-fed to the critical surfaces. There was no engineering shortcut buried in the design, because the engineers who designed it had not yet been handed the instruction to build obsolescence in. Those motors, maintained properly, will outlast almost anything built in the last 30 years. I have personal knowledge of a 1963 Chevrolet 327 that has 412,000 original miles on it. Original block, original crankshaft. The owner, a retired shop teacher in northern Michigan, has done one engine rebuild in 40 years. Cost him about $450 in parts. Now let me tell you what you can do, because this is not just history. If you own a car from the 60s, 70s, or 80s, or if you are trying to keep a modern car alive longer than Detroit wants, the principles are the same. The single most important thing I did in 44 years of working on motors is something I learned from my father, who learned it from his foreman at River Rouge in 1953. He called it the $40 habit, and I have never seen it fail. Every 3,000 miles, not 5,000, not 7,000, 3,000, you change the oil. Full stop. You use a high detergent conventional oil, not a synthetic, on any engine built before 1985. Synthetics can loosen old seals in engines that were not designed for them. And you do not use whatever bulk oil the quick change place has on special. You use the weight specification on the valve cover. Along with that, every 6 months, you put a bottle of upper cylinder lubricant into the gas tank. One bottle, about 12 ounces, about $4 at any parts counter. This keeps the valve stems lubricated from the top, reduces carbon buildup on the intake valves, and is the single cheapest maintenance item most people skip. Hank Mueller, a man I knew for 20 years, ran a shop in Madison, Wisconsin, told me he had never seen an engine with burned valves that had been treated consistently with upper cylinder lube. I believe him. Every 12 months, you check the valve clearance if you have a non-hydraulic valve train. A feeler gauge costs $3, 10 minutes per cylinder. This alone will tell you everything the engine is trying to tell you before it costs anything. And every 2 years, you pull the carburetor, if you have one, and clean it. Not replace it, clean it. A rebuild kit is between $8 and $25. The time is 2 hours. This is the fix that dealer shops charge $350 to $500 to do, and that takes their technician about 40 minutes with an air-powered cleaning tank. That is the whole program. Oil every 3,000. Upper cylinder lube every 6 months. Valve clearance every 12 months. Carburetor clean every 2 years. Call it $40 a year in parts and your own time. That is the difference between an engine that lasts 400,000 miles and one that starts falling apart at 100,000. I know a man, Big Ray, 74 years old, ex-truck driver out of Columbus, Ohio, who's driven the same 1978 Ford F-250 for 48 years. Same 360 engine. He rebuilt it once in 2001 at 240,000 miles. Since then, he has put another 160,000 on the rebuild. The truck runs. It does not look new, but it runs. Big Ray told me once, "Earl, I don't understand why people keep buying new trucks when the old ones still work." I told him, "Ray, that's exactly the question they don't want you to ask." Let me leave you with the math. A new full-size pickup in 2026 runs between $40,000 and $70,000 depending on trim. The average American replaces their vehicle every 6 years. That is somewhere between $6,500 and $12,000 per year just in depreciation, before insurance, before financing costs. A well-maintained 1970s or 80s truck, kept on the $40 habit, costs maybe $800 to $1,200 per year in maintenance, including the occasional larger job. The difference is not small. Over 20 years, that difference is between $150,000 and $240,000. That is what Alfred Sloan's 1924 decision cost you over a lifetime of buying new. He did not steal it from you outright. He just made sure you traded it in year after year for a shinier version of the same thing you already had. Don Kirby's 1955 Bel Air ran for 22 years because nobody had yet convinced him he needed a new one every 6, and nobody had yet found a way to build the obsolescence into the metal itself. My father worked the River Rouge plant when they were still building engines to last. I watched what happened when they stopped. I spent 17 years in my own shop undoing what the dealers and the manufacturers wanted done to those motors, extracting the life that was still left in them when someone was told there wasn't any. The motors are not the problem, the plan is the problem, and now you know the plan. I built these cars and I fixed them for 44 years. What I just told you is what they don't want you to know. If any of this rang true, if you've got an old motor you're trying to keep alive, or a new one you don't want to give up on too early, hit subscribe and stay close. I've got 44 years of notes in this garage and we're just getting started.